This week, a tribute to the late, great Tom Spurgeon, comics advocate and historian. I'm joined by Kumar, the Billy Ireland Museum's Caitlin McGurk, the Virtual Memories show's Gil Roth, and Wildwood artist and childhood friend of Tom's, Dan Wright. This is Tim.
This is Kumar.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo with Kumar in Melbourne. How are you doing?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
Okay.
You don't usually ask that question at the start.
Well, I've kind of gotten that habit with Mulele, and so it's carried over to this podcast too. So unfortunately, we needed to do an episode marking the passing of Tom Spurgeon, who died on November 13th, which was about a month before his 51st birthday. Of course, he wrote the Comics Reporter blog for about 15 years.
Wow.
And I don't know, I put together some kind of bullet points of his bio here, but I was trying to remember how I found out about it. I think it was on Facebook. Did you post something?
About the existence of the blog itself?
Well, no, about Tom passing away.
I heard about it through... I just saw a thing on Facebook, which was a Twitter link that said Tom had passed, and it was before there was any news or anything. And then I Googled it, and I didn't see any other news about it, and I was like, is it true? Is it not true? What's the scoop? And then finally, like within a few hours of seeing that first Twitter thing, and I don't remember who posted that or what, I started seeing news, or I think I saw some confirmation early enough on that I posted the link to the Twitter in our Facebook page.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so in this episode, Kumar and I are going to start out here, and then you'll hear from three people who knew Tom better than we did, who I talked to already, so you'll hear those recordings, and I'll introduce those in a second. Now, Kumar, did you ever meet him?
I met him once at San Diego in, what year did I go? 2016 I went.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I sat on the Kramer's Ergo panel. I was in the audience and I watched the Kramer's Ergo panel, and he was in the audience too. I sat down next to him and we had a bit of a chat, and then he napped through quite a bit of it. And that was it. That was our one face-to-face interaction.
Okay. Yeah, I met him the one time also. Actually, I'd kind of forgotten. I was going through all of his appearances on our podcast, and it reminded me that when I went to the Mocha Festival in 2016, I was expecting to see him there.
Right.
And in fact, he and I talked about it on kind of a preview of the show on the podcast, kind of building up to meeting him, and then for some reason he wasn't able to make it.
Okay.
But then the following year, 2017, I did meet him at the Billy Ireland Museum in Columbus, Ohio, where he was working, and talked to him on the podcast then. And actually, the fact that he was on our podcast was because you suggested we invite him to talk about Love and Rockets.
And how... So normally it wouldn't occur to me to reach out to somebody, but I must have heard him on some other podcast. And I don't know why I thought he would be open to the idea. Was that the first one, Love and Rockets?
Yeah, well, so we did separate episodes for Jaime and Gilbert Hernandez. Because
I remember he had written about the death of Speedy Ortiz, and he had that funny story, which I made him repeat on that episode, about how somebody did something in Love and Rockets. I don't remember what it was, and he immediately got on the phone and called somebody and left a message on their machine about what had happened. And when he starts that relationship with Danita, I really, really wanted that to work. And then it kind of doesn't, and he ends up in that weird relationship with Vivian, and I was just as interested, even though because it was so weird and it was going to end in some sort of disaster.
Listen to yourself, Kumar. I mean, that's the great thing about these stories. If they end up appealing to you and you kind of dive into them, you really do start having just that natural soap opera reaction. My brother still makes fun of me because there was a scene where two characters get in a fist fight, and I actually called my brother on the phone and said, these two guys got into a fist fight and hung up. Like they were real people, like they were our friends that got into a fist fight out in the street. I was like, oh, dude, he fought this dude, and I hung up. And like, this is ridiculous. But of course, that's the power of good art. That's the power of a really good serial soap operas, is that you become invested in these relationships, and you want them to succeed or not succeed, or you can't stand a certain character when they show up. And he's done that as well as anyone, especially over the last 30 years.
And then he did this write-up about the death of Speedy, and I think I was like, it might have been pretty, like, very close to the same time we were about to record or thinking about recording, and I think that would have occurred to me that we should ask him.
Yeah, you had the impression that he would be good to have on, and so we reached out to him. And so his first episode was episode 300, where we talked about Jaime Hernandez.
What year was that?
That episode was published October 24th, 2011.
Whoa, okay.
And then 5 episodes later, 305, we talked about Gilbert Hernandez. That went up January 2nd, 2012.
Okay.
So totally he was on, he appeared on 15 episodes.
Wow.
10 of which included you. There were 5 more that was just me talking with him.
Wow, okay, I didn't even know that.
Well, I think at least one of those you had intended to be on and weren't able to for some reason.
I think that would have been the Richard Thompson. What am I thinking of?
Yeah, so the third episode that he was on was just me and him, talking about the end of the cul-de-sac comic strip.
Right.
Yeah, before Thompson passed away.
Yeah.
But just, he wasn't able to do it anymore because of his Parkinson's.
Right.
So when the strip ended, Tom and I did an episode about that. That one went up September 17th, 2012.
Okay. Do you have a list of all the episodes there?
Yes, I do.
All right. I would love to hear. Because I'm amazed. Because in my mind, it was like, 5 or 6. So 15 is like 300% more. That's mind-boggling.
So the fourth time he was on was episode 339 with you and me. And we talked about John Porcellino's King Cat.
Yeah.
That went up December 3rd, 2012.
Yeah.
Then in 2013, I did kind of a series of episodes about how we could expand the audience for comics. And the first episode in that series was me and Tom. And that went up April 8th, 2013. That was episode 349. That was kind of not like consecutive episodes, but just kind of an occasional series where I talked to different kind of significant people in comics about how we could get more readers. And then a couple months later, June 3rd, 2013, episode 358, the three of us talked about Carl Barks.
Right, okay.
Then 2014, he was on a couple of times. Episode 404, the three of us talked about Jules Pfeiffer's 666.
Yeah.
And then 420, on October 20th, 2014, a double-header, Michael Kupperman's Tales Designed to Thrizzle and Lisa Hannawalt's My Dirty Dumb Eyes.
Yeah.
Then 2015, a couple of times. 446, on April 13th, 2015, I did an interview with him. He was the interviewee in that one. And then 462, August 24th, 2015, the three of us talked about Stan Sakai's Usagi Yojimbo. Mm-hmm. Then, let's see, 2016, twice. One was just Tom and me, and we talked about the death of Alvin Buenaventura.
Oh, right. Okay.
And then that was when we also talked about the upcoming Mocha Festival, where we were expecting to meet. And then December 19th, 2016, episode 527, we talked to him about his book, We Told You So.
Yes.
The History of Fantagraphics.
Yeah.
Then one time in 2017, which was when I was at the Billy Ireland, and I talked to Tom about his organizing the CXC festival, Comics Crossroads Columbus. And then 2018, the three of us talked about Peter Bagg's Hate in episode 588. That was March 19th, 2018. And then episode 612, November 20th, 2018, about talking about the death of Stan Lee.
Right.
And yeah, for whatever reason, we never got around to having him on in 2019, unfortunately.
Was he still doing the CXC? Was he still an organizer of that? Do you know?
Yeah, he was.
Okay.
He was doing that up to his death. They just had the festival in, I think, October.
Right. I think there were certain comics that we would talk about. Let's talk about this or that, and sometimes I knew from reading Comics Reporter that he wrote about certain subjects frequently. Like Usagi Yojimbo, every time there was a new issue almost, or, pretty often he would have a little bit of a write-up about it. And some of those books, like Hate and Love and Rockets, he just had an inside track, from being at Fantagraphics. So often some of those subjects were perfect. It was perfect to have him on, because he could talk, and he had so much insight about those books. And sometimes it'd be like King Cat. It's like I didn't even really have a good grasp of it, and it was really illuminating and educating to have him on and kind of talk about why it was so good and what was interesting about it and the history of it, which a lot of those things I didn't know about. So,
yeah, well, I found that when we had him on, I didn't really need to prepare very much, because he'd just talk and talk. Sometimes I could hardly say anything. It's just
Yeah, and the funny thing is, apparently, comics was not his number one thing. Apparently, he's more into music.
Yeah, well, in some of the interviews that you'll hear coming up in this episode, they talk about, there were a number of things that he was just a really deep nerd about. Yeah, music, basketball.
Wow.
And the Bible, because he went to seminary for 2 years.
Wow. Okay.
Well, then let me get to my bio points then. So he was born December 16th, 1968 in Muncie, Indiana.
Yep.
He got a Bachelor of Arts in History and Politics from Washington and Lee University, Lexington, Virginia in 1991. Then he attended Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary in Evanston, Illinois for 2 years. But for whatever reason, nobody seems to know why he decided not to complete the degree. I assume that it was 4 years.
Yeah.
Because my dad went to seminary for 4 years. And then in 1994, he became editor of the Comics Journal. And he was doing that for 5 years, and that was most of the period that I was a regular reader of the Comics Journal, just by coincidence. So he, at that time, he was just a name on the publication. Yeah, I didn't really know anything about him.
Yeah.
Quit that in 1999. Then he joined his childhood friend Dan Wright, who we'll hear from later in this podcast. And they did a syndicated comic strip. Which originally was called Bobo's Progress, and then they sort of relaunched it as Wildwood. And that was syndicated by King Features for a few years, 1999 to 2002, I think. And it ran in about 80 papers. Especially when it was Wildwood, well, I guess maybe to some extent when it was Bobo's Progress too, I think. I haven't seen much of it, but it had this Christian element to it.
Right.
which was something that was attractive to the Syndicate because they had wanted to have a comic strip that was kind of from a Christian point of view. And I guess the fact that he had been to seminary was just sort of a convenient extra. It wasn't really why Dan asked him to come on. I found an interview of them, which I'll link to, which was done in like 2001. It's a write-up of the interview where Dan says that one reason that he asked Tom was that he knew that Tom was going to be leaving the Comics Journal or wanted to leave the Comics Journal. And so just would give him something to move on to. And then in 2003, Tom put out a book with Jordan Raphael, Stan Lee and the Rise and Fall of the American Comic Book. And Jordan Raphael also designed the Comics Reporter site.
Okay.
I got that from Wikipedia. And so for the next, I think that started in 2004.
Wow. Like Wild West days of internet. Almost.
Yeah. And I know he moved around the U.S. I don't know where all he lived. Of course, he was in Seattle in the Comics Journal days. When we first started talking with him, he was in New Mexico. And then in 2014, he moved to Columbus, Ohio, to be the executive director of Cartoon Crossroads Columbus.
Okay.
And we'll be hearing from Caitlin McGurk at the Billy Ireland Cartoon Library and Museum, which, there's some kind of relationship between the festival and the Billy Ireland. It was always kind of fuzzy to me because when I was there, I was told Tom was not really an employee of the Billy Ireland. I guess he was more an employee of Ohio State University. I don't quite. I'd have to go back and listen to that episode again. I don't quite remember. But yeah, Caitlin talks about how he got into that job, and because at the time they had this festival that wasn't every year, and they wanted to kind of upgrade it, and searched for someone to manage it. And I need to say this too. So when I talked to Caitlin, after I stopped the recorder, because I thought maybe this wasn't something that she would want to talk about publicly, but I was wrong. I asked her what the cause of death was, because I hadn't seen any reports that mentioned how he died. And she wanted me to publicize that it was a heart attack, because I guess there have been rumors going around that it was suicide, which it wasn't, she says.
Okay.
So she wanted me to put those rumors to rest. So, it was a heart attack.
He also had a near-death experience a few years back.
Well, in 2011, he wrote about that extensively on his blog. And then, who was it that told me, was it she or someone, that he had another spell in 2016, which was not so publicized.
Okay. Jesus.
I mean, I kind of remember that. Sometimes I would, because he was always very welcoming to. He'd say to us, if you got any episodes that you really want to publicize, send me a link and I'll put it on the Comics Reporter.
Yeah.
But sometimes I didn't get any response. So he would link to it often, but sometimes he didn't, and I was never sure if it just the email got lost or what. And I suspect that at least one of those times was probably in 2016 when he was sick again.
Yeah.
And in my talk with Dan Wright, he talks about how Tom just couldn't quite seem to focus on taking care of himself because it was all about writing. He just needed to write.
Right.
And so he just, grab whatever was handy to eat rather than because,
So after that health scare, he really trimmed down and he looked amazing. And then next time I saw a photo of him, he was back to the size he was before that incident. So I get the sense that.
Yeah, so he looked great after he recovered from that, but didn't last.
Yeah. But boy, we were lucky to have him in comics. I mean, considering how much other stuff he had expertise in and paths he could have gone down. And it always amazed me from the first time he came on our show to the last that he came on at all. He could have been doing anything else, and I don't know what the numbers are like. But as you said last time we talked about it, it was like he had nothing better to do, or what was it? How did you put it?
I'm not sure, but probably something like that. Yeah, just like nothing else to do. I'll just appear on Deconstructing Comics.
Yeah, but he was so giving, and as we mentioned, he would just talk and talk, and it was the happiest place he could be, was just to show up and talk on this show with not super high numbers of listeners, and really at no benefit to himself except that he enjoyed talking about those comics.
Yeah, I mean he wanted to advocate for comics, and of course also, as some of the people I talked to said, advocating for creators, and especially so many creators who, in their retirement, they get sick and they don't have any health insurance, he was trying to advocate for ways to change that.
Yeah, and he was one of the few guys in comics that was sort of on Stan Lee's side. Was sort of sympathetic to Stan Lee's situation. Yeah, that was interesting too. But he was a giant intellect, so smart and erudite and articulate. He knew how to pinpoint very exactly what made a comic good and why it was interesting, or the opposite.
Okay, so like I said, you'll hear from. I'm going to put them in this order: Caitlin McGurk at the Billy Ireland Museum. And then Gil Roth, who was a longtime friend of Tom's, and he talks about how they met. And Gil Roth is arranging the New York memorial service for Tom. They already had one in Columbus that Caitlin was organizing, but they're also having one in New York, which is on January 24th. And I'll link to that info because this episode's coming out a couple days before that. So in case anyone's in New York and wants to go.
Why New York?
I guess just because there were a lot of people in New York who knew Tom and couldn't make it to Columbus. So
I see.
Yeah, so they wanted to have another one near. But I mean, it seems to me that they could just then start having them all over the country, because I think there were people who knew him everywhere who would have liked to go to the memorial.
Yeah.
I have an LA one and a Miami one and a Chicago one. And then finally, my talk with Dan Wright, his childhood friend, and that interview was the best of the three, which is why I'm going to put it last. And because Dan really had some kind of insight into Tom, I think. And he had a lot to say about him because they'd known each other for so long, since they were like teenagers. So, So, if you have nothing else to say, then let's go on to...
all I'll say is I'm still kind of shaken by... It was really shocking on the day. It was very upsetting. And I'm still... What a monumental loss. And just a guy to talk to, and was so friendly and giving. Still terrible.
Yeah, I don't know how there can ever be somebody else who has the same combination of qualities.
Yeah.
The encyclopedic knowledge of comics and just the givingness, and everybody felt like he was everybody who knew him better than we did thought that he was their best friend. I kept seeing that on Twitter.
I didn't see that.
I lost my best friend today. So he had a lot of best friends.
Yeah.
And I think they were legitimately all his best friends. Because he just had a way of really kind of making each person feel important, and that's something that I wish I could do, and I'm just not very good at. He took genuine interest in everyone. So okay, well, let's move on to the interviews.
Okay.
So I'm Caitlin McGurk. I'm the associate curator and assistant professor at the Ohio State University Billy Ireland Cartoon Library and Museum. And, I've known Tom for a little over a decade as a friend and colleague and collaborator. We became extremely close probably about 9 years ago or so, and then just kind of closer and closer over the years. I knew him, like so many people did, through the Comics Reporter. That's how we first kind of met, and I became familiar with his work. But we really connected when I was working at the Center for Cartoon Studies in Vermont. And also, as many people have experienced, entered into a email correspondence that just seemed endless. So Tom was a really, verbose email writer, and we were kind of email pen pals on like a multiple times a day basis for years.
Wow.
So it was like being like having a really close friend, super present in your life, but he wasn't actually physically super present in my life until he moved to Columbus. So maybe 8 years ago or so.
8 years? Okay.
So maybe 8 years or so ago, we started talking about the idea of creating a festival out here in Columbus. Previously, the Billy Ireland had a triennial festival of cartoon art that was more of a small-scale ticketed event, and that had kind of just like lost its mojo. It was running out of fuel and funding, but we decided instead that we wanted to reform it to be a different kind of festival, something citywide, and something free and open to everyone and about all different forms of comic art. And so that's when, the conversation started about Cartoon Crossroads, and that we would need to hire someone to do this, even though they'd work closely with all of us, here at OSU and across the different institutions in Columbus. And of course, one of the first names that came to mind was Tom. Mm-hmm. We were trying to think of someone that would have the connections in the industry, but also the knowledge to create really innovative programming. And we wanted to create a festival that was really focused on the creators themselves. And that was always a major value of Tom's. So that is what eventually got him out here, which was about 5 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah. And we've, been extremely close friends since then. He's, definitely one of my best friends, and been through a lot together, especially, around some of his health scares and, some of mine too. And, worked together, fought a lot, and kind of like collaborated to build a pretty substantial community out here. So.
Well, it's interesting to me. I remember noticing on Twitter when he had just passed away, like how many people were referring to him as one of their closest friends. Something about him, I guess. I mean, I only met him once, but I lived too far away to see him more than that one time. It just seemed like there's something about him that everybody felt close to him.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the amazing things about him. Like, Tom is someone who kept in touch with everybody. And this was very apparent at the, memorial I organized for him at the Billy Ireland. Like, he had friends from kindergarten that he was still constantly, emailing with and sending Christmas cards to. And he was just that kind of friend. He is easily the most loyal friend I've ever had, and someone who is just like aggressively there for the people that he cares about. And so I think that's why so many people felt close to him. He made people feel seen and valued in a industry that really undervalues people. And that it goes a long way, you know. I mean, he did so much for me as a friend, more than most. And you know, it's more than anyone would even expect of a friend. He was just that kind of really generous person, and treated friends as if they were family, which is like, it's one thing to just say that, but it's a very different reality with him. Like my relationship with Tom was very much like an unconditional love thing that most people associate with like family relationships. So.
So now explain a little bit more about what he was actually doing for the festival.
Yeah, so he was the executive director of it, so he was kind of running the show. I mean, we have a board, and then we have a council. So the board is like some, big name folks throughout Columbus, and then the council is people who represent the institutions that CXC is held in, because it's held in multiple locations throughout the city. And Tom oversaw kind of everything. So he, in addition to kind of overseeing all the operations, and writing grants and stuff like that, he also created all the programming. So he would, with advisement and help from a programming committee, he would choose the guests. He would be part of the review of the exhibitor list, and then he would actually write the programming, come up with the different themes we wanted to touch on. And then, amazingly, especially the first couple of years, Tom would also then actually moderate or be the interviewer for every single program, which was crazy. And we quickly made sure that was not the case, because it was exhausting him. But he was just the person with the knowledge, and he was so excited about CXC and everything he envisioned for it. So he was involved in every way. And, he'd have his brother fly out from LA and be the bus driver that would shuttle everyone around. And it was a really very personal task for Tom. I think, like I said, the focus was on creators, and that was something that was so essential to what Tom did in all ways. He was really interested in people. And, one of the big things that Tom brought to the table, and that we're still trying to build upon for his legacy, is that he wanted to have a lot of professional development around CXC. So making sure that CXC could be the kind of place that could provide resources for creators to figure out how to deal with foreign rights, or how to deal with health care, or what to do with their estate, and this and that. Hiring photographers to take headshots of cartoonists, just kind of helping cartoonists was Tom's thing. So.
Yeah, well, and of course, a lot of the cartoonists, especially when they're older and not doing as much work, or kind of retired, and then a lot of them run into financial problems and doing GoFundMes for their hospital bills and stuff like that. So
yeah, and that always broke Tom's heart. And Tom's phrase that I heard him say 1.5 million times was, "We can do better. We can do better by these people. We should be doing better. Comics should be doing better by its creators and contributors." It's kind of shameful. It's no single person's fault. It's the result of a 100-plus-year-old exploitative industry. So he really wanted to fix that. One of the things he wanted to do that we talked at length about, but I'd be surprised if it ever happens with him gone, is he had a major goal of creating a union for cartoonists. So he really just believed in kind of, cartoonist rights.
Yeah. So what I've noticed the times that I talked with him, and he was on our podcast more than 10 times, I forgot the exact number, that it seemed to be impossible to bring up a comic that he didn't know about. And he could probably tell me something about it that I didn't know. Did you ever find a comic that you knew about that he had never heard of?
You know, truthfully, I think sometimes I did, and maybe he didn't want to admit it. Or there'd be people who, like, applied to CXC, or people that someone suggested as a guest, and Tom would, I think, sometimes maybe pretend he knew who it was and then look it up. But, like, who knows? I mean, he was truly just a fountain of knowledge. I mean, I think he took more knowledge with him, you know, to the grave than that any of us could possibly make up combined. And on top of it was like intimate personal knowledge about people, you know, since he really took the time to check in with so many people and get to know folks. Like, God, I mean, Tom knew where the bodies were buried for sure. So.
Yeah. Well, we've kind of touched on several things here, but what to you would be the most striking thing about Tom as a person?
The most striking thing about him as a person in general. I think his Tom's passion and the seriousness with which he took his industry and career. You know, like, that's what I'm going to miss talking about with him the most. Is, I don't know, I feel like he and I really connected over the seriousness with which we both take this community and this industry, and that did deep and personal care for it. And not just, and I'm not talking about fandom. I mean, like, caring about the people and the thing itself. So I think that's one of the biggest things for that we're missing without him, is someone that actually cares that much. But another thing that I've heard a lot of people talk about and come out of the woodwork with stories about is what an advocate he was. I mean, he was a huge, huge advocate for me professionally and personally. When I left the Center for Cartoon Studies and then came here to OSU a half a year later, Tom was, you know, very aware of some issues around that transition and fought real hard for me. I was also really young and early in my career at that time. And, you know, not that I'm discounting my own efforts, but I truly feel that because Tom took me seriously, he made other people take me seriously. And he kind of validated a lot of stuff and made me a lot more visible and seen. Like, he really advocated for people, not just cartoonists, but, you know, people like me and communities and
our podcast. You know, he would, he'd say, you know, whenever you have something you want to promote, just let me know and I'll put it on Comics Reporter. And sometimes he would be too busy and he missed it, but, you know, a number of times he did, you know, link to an episode that we were trying to get out there. Yeah,
I mean, and you know, the birthday thing, like, just celebrating people, making people feel seen, advocating for young cartoonists and people in need. That was a huge thing. You know, like, he would always, you know, funnel people's Kickstarters on there, and it would get more eyeballs than it would anywhere else. And I just wonder what we're going to do without that. I don't see someone else really picking up the reins to do quite what he did. And in particular, to do it from such a personal level. Like, it's one thing to have, like, general kind of, I don't want to name names, but, like, websites that are just, like, on comics news. But the Comics Reporter was not just comics news, you know? It was like the story of who we all are and a documentation of our lives in comics. It was not just drips of news and headlines. And it was also written so personally and thoughtfully. I don't see that. I think that we lived during a golden age of Tom Spurgeon, and we're all really lucky for it. I don't think we'll ever have anything like that again, but I think hopefully, you know, there's stuff that everybody can do who knew him or admired him from afar or whatever, to try to carry on some of those values he had, because, you know, we're a lot worse off without him. So.
Yeah. So what's the future of the festival now?
So, you know, the festival is still happening. We, you know, took a moment to recalibrate and to really think about not just can we do it without Tom, but do we want to do it without Tom? And that was a really hard question for everyone. and it was not an easy decision to continue it without him. But it was the decision that we came to after talking through the fact that it is exactly what he'd want us to do. He would be very upset if we stopped doing it. And that also people need it, you know? I mean, he created a festival that people need. It's you know, again, I know I'm biased, but it's really different than a lot of other festivals. And people feel different when they come to it, I think. So we decided to keep it going. A interim director is going to take Tom's place. I think there'll probably be an announcement about that sometime soon, just for the next year. And then, you know, I'd say don't quote me on this, but I know it's being recorded. And then my understanding, though this could change, my understanding, though, is that there will then be a national search.
Wow.
So we're going to try to actually look pretty broadly to find someone, you know, I don't want to say to fill Tom's shoes, because that's never going to happen, but to take the lead on the festival and take over a lot of the tasks he was doing, and hopefully bring some new and different, you know, strengths to the table. And I think that's going to be really competitive and difficult to find. But, you know, it's a full-time salary for working on a festival, which is, you know, not the easiest. It's not a common thing to come by for a comic show. So I hope we get some good applicants that'll, you know, move us into a new chapter.
Hi, I'm Gil Roth. I'm the, creator, producer, etc. of the Virtual Memories Show podcast. Tom and I met, online in about 1996 or so. I wrote a couple of maybe mean-spirited but funny jokes on the Comics Journal message board, and they were right up Tom's alley in terms of the subject matter, which was the Claremont and Byrne run of the X-Men, Moses Malone in the American Basketball Association, and Tom Stoppard's play Arcadia. If anything, I think he thought somebody was pranking him by just fight clubbing and coming up with all of his background things that he would have been gaga for. So from there, we started a virtual conversation, and then a year or two later, he came out to New York. We got to meet in person, and became my closest friend over the next 20 years plus.
I see. And so you are organizing or have organized a memorial service for him?
Yeah, we're going to be holding a New York City area memorial at the Society of Illustrators on January 24th, 2020, in case people are listening after the fact. Yeah. There was a wonderful memorial service for him in Columbus, Ohio, back in December at the Billy Ireland Library, but a lot of people from the New York area weren't necessarily going to be able to make it out there, and I felt that we should do something for him in the city also. So I put that together at the Society on East 63rd Street, and we're going to have a similar sort of event with sort of formal program of speakers, and then an open mic time for people to just come up and offer their remembrances and thoughts about Tom.
Yeah, because what I've picked up, I mean, I did meet Tom in person once, and we talked a number of times on Skype. But he just had such a good way of making everybody feel they were important, I think.
Yeah, it's a common refrain that came up, especially that weekend in Columbus. And I actually posted the audio from the Columbus Memorial to my Virtual Memories podcast near the end of the year. From people who weren't necessarily comics people. There was childhood friends, college friends, and then the comics world. But that common element was the sense that he cared about you. It wasn't just a, what can I learn? What career advancey things can I get from talking to you? But how the most common question people would bring up was when Tom would just stop and ask, how are you? You know, like he just legit cared about people and how they were doing, how things were for them. Not just how is the work going or when is the next issue coming out, you know?
Yeah, I mean, he had such an encyclopedic knowledge of comics, too. I mean, I would mention to him some kind of obscure comic, and and I know about this guy, and who made it, and maybe he knew more about it than I did in a lot of cases.
Oh yeah, he again, encyclopedic knowledge there, but something that came up that I didn't know about particularly. I mean, I knew but didn't know during the memorial in Billy Ireland was his knowledge of the Bible was similarly encyclopedic, and I knew he'd gone to seminary. I knew that stuff, and I knew, in a sense, how that colored his way of relating to people, not in a direct biblical Jesus loves you sense, but in a, as one of the speakers brings up, a sort of pastoral sense about, people as a flock in a way. And yeah, his knowledge, his curiosity, I think is really what characterized him. The knowledge was immense, and the amount of time spent with comics was absolutely enormous. But, that was indicative of something larger than comics about Tom's character, I think.
Mm-hmm. And he carried that over to really advocating for comics creators too.
Sure.
Say something about that.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that came up. I was talking with Douglas Wolk when he was writing the obit for Tom about how in the early stages Tom's advocacy was about getting comics legitimacy, getting them, treated, we told you so, the title of that book about Fanta, comics as art. And the second phase, once that was achieved, once we understood that comics, once it was accepted, in various circles that the comics were legit, it really became much more about, let's not have all these great creators, dying in their 60s, 70s, 80s, completely penniless. Let's not have, the younger artists, struggling to make ends meet or unable to make the work they want to make because, we're not supporting it enough, that there isn't an ecosystem and economy in place to support vibrant creative art and comics.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting point about, several points there, but about the legitimacy thing. Of course, comics have certainly come up from like when I was a teenager in the 80s and, kind of afraid to tell anybody that I read comics. But how much of that change do you think is because of Tom, and what specifically did he do?
I think, part of it, I think he built bridges with some publishers, not just the great comics publishers like Fantagraphics and Drawn and Quarterly, but I think he also helped with the quote unquote legit publishers, the literary houses in New York. I don't know too much in depth of the conversations and relationships he had there, but I know that, there was, we'll say conversation along those lines, ways of just introducing really good creators to great publishers. I know he cared about it immensely through the Comics Journal and through his work with Fantagraphics. And I think that, first and foremost helped work on that degree of legitimacy, that sense that these books belonged, not just, good for a comic, but good for a book. And I think the work they built historically in terms of, the 100 greatest comics of the century, things like that, and then subsequent work with the Billy Ireland, those are things that really established not just, greatness of comics, as literary work, but the sense of continuity, that sense of history and building upon it that all great art forms have.
Yeah, that
I should amend that too. Except for comics, which of course began with like Winsor McCay and George Harriman and guys like that in the early days when there was no tradition, and yet you had these absolute titans. But anyway, that's an oddball digression.
Okay, yeah, that 100 greatest comics of the 20th century issue. I still have that around here somewhere. I can't seem to figure out where it is right now. But we talked to him a little bit about that before, and yeah, it seems like that was sort of a controversial issue.
From what I recall, yeah, I don't have any in-depth or behind-the-scenes craziness, but anything that's done on that scale with a committee, you're going to end up with compromises and people being angry at each other. And that's not just in comics. Every field that sort of thing is going to happen. You're going to find. We all have things we personally champion that we know are not, pantheon level, but we still try and sneak in. And I'm assuming that sort of thing cropped up. And then you get the personal taste driven by, the fact that it's the Comics Journal and Fantagraphics. There's certain, artists and types of comics that get championed that way that, I think over the years, there's, things have evened out or become more balanced in terms of what we can call great, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Oh, here, I found it. Yeah, number 1 was Crazy Cat. But, I can imagine a lot of people arguing about, no, this is too high, this is too low. Why do you like this one so much?
As I'm sure you could go through that 100 and start, really? You put that there?
But yeah, I mean, no formulation is going to work for everybody.
No.
But yeah, I guess that was a pretty ambitious thing for him to even try to do.
Sure. And that was part of it all. Even, doing CXC, trying to helping to build an event like that. There are these things that, you have to strive for something big. If you keep with just hitting singles or just trying to get by, you may not leave a mark. And I think we all, the understanding I have of Tom, not just from the comics world, but, from everybody whose lives he touched, he did reach high and he did, affect a lot of people.
Yeah. So what do you think was the most striking thing about Tom as a person?
That's tough. I mean, for the two of us, it was interesting. It's something I've contemplated in the last few weeks, especially, again, meeting all these people who knew many different aspects of him over the years. Most of our relationship was text. It was all email and prose back and forth. We only saw each other in person maybe 50 times total. We didn't have the college dorm, hanging out until 4 o'clock in the morning shooting the breeze. So we had I had different Tom and maybe a more idealized version in terms of how he portrayed himself and how I portrayed myself to him. But what it was, I think, again, it's that sense of caring and that sense of caring about other people's passions, not necessarily sharing, that comic that you love, he might not love, but he really wants to know why you love it. To understand what you were getting out of it, what, maybe it's going to change his perception of that comic, maybe not, but he'll understand you a little bit better in terms of this is he likes this book because of that reason, or this is a unique aspect of his childhood that this captured, etc. So yeah, I think the curiosity and the breadth of his knowledge, but the curiosity and the caring were just unparalleled. The further aspect and the reason why I think one of the great laments now that he's gone, he didn't have an angle. There wasn't a payoff to all this. There wasn't some monetary connection. There wasn't a career advance thing. This wasn't going to get him that big gig somewhere. And for everybody else we know, there's always a hook of some kind. There's some sort of angle. And he could wed that great knowledge, that great curiosity, and the willingness just to help other people for the sake of helping other people, that I think we'll never see its like again.
Yeah. Coming up, Dan Wright, longtime friend of Tom's and his collaborator on the Wildwood comic strip, with his memories of Tom, as well as what he himself has been up to since his previous DCP appearance back in 2009. I'm continuing to republish classic episodes of Deconstructing Comics in reverse order, unlocked by our patrons' generous support. This week's classic episode from May 7th, 2007 features our discussion of 100 Bullets Decayed, Fear Agent Volume 1, Tag and Bink Were Here, and Top 10 Volume 2. The classic episodes can be found on our Facebook and Twitter feeds by clicking on the earliest months listed on the left sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com, or in publicly available posts on our Patreon page or in the Patreon smartphone app. Check out all our goals and help us reach them at patreon.com/deconcomics.
Welcome to the Superman Fan Podcast. My name is Billy Hogan, and I will be your host. Before we begin our journey through the time barrier, please ensure that your red indestructible capes are securely fastened around your necks so that we may all travel safely into the past to explore the Silver Age adventures of the Man of Steel in the pages of Action Comics, Superman, Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane, and World's Finest Comics. After we return from our journey, I encourage you to go to the website, thesupermanfanpodcast.blogspot.com. I look forward to have you join me each week to explore the Silver Age adventures of the Man of Steel.
Well, my name is Dan Wright. I'm 53 years old. I was a friend from childhood of Tom Spurgeon. As near I can figure, we met initially in 1977 or 78. It goes back that far.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I knew Tom initially because of in Muncie, Indiana, where Tom and I both were raised, there was a civic theater downtown, and they had a Saturday morning young actors workshop that was about a 4-hour session, 3 or 4 hour session, that were area directors and stage people would come in to the high school and middle school kids who were coming to the young actors workshop and teaching stagecraft, doing some improv and stage direction and table reads and things like that through plays. And I was initially friends with Tom's older brother, Whit, but because they were so close, I was immediately friends with Tom because Tom was one of the kids that his older brother, Whit, ran around with. So everywhere Whit went and did things, Tom was usually there. I was one of those kids also. And very quickly, we just sort of fell into doing things together regularly. Quickly, within a couple of years of that, we were playing D&D and doing other things.
I see. Yeah, because you're a couple years older than Tom was?
I am. I'm 3 years older than Tom.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, that his relationship with his brother sounds kind of like my relationship with my brother. My brother's also 3 years younger than me, and we would hang out together with my friends. So,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and knowing them both, it was really easy to see how they had such similar tastes, likes, and, of course, there's aside from the whole conversation of the family personality, which I think families just typically have, Whit and Tom had so many areas of interest where they were both conversant and, connoisseurs really of music and story and books and plays and so many things that they just both loved talking about, even if it was just the two of them. I think that friendship just continued on. I've said several times since Tom's death, I imagine Whit feels more alone than he's ever felt in his life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Now, I guess Tom went to seminary for a couple of years, but I assume that was a 4-year program that he didn't finish.
I don't think he did. No, that was after his time at Washington Lee, and I was in the Army while he was at Garrett.
Okay. Do you have any idea why he didn't finish?
I don't.
Okay. Was his seminary background part of what led you to when you and he were working on Bobo's Progress, which later became Wildwood, that it became sort of focused on a church, a Christian background, or was that completely your idea, or how did it end up being in that direction?
Well, it wasn't because of Tom. Tom just happened to be able to bring that to the party.
Okay.
It actually came as a result of Jay Kennedy phoned me, who once upon a time was the editor at King Feature Syndicate, and I think we were about, a year and a half to 2 years into what was at the time Bobo's Progress, where the principals were a band. Music was the reason why they were, or one of the reasons why their friendship of those characters, existed in the world that we had created for them. And Jay phoned me one afternoon and said, for about 10 years now, I have been looking for a strip with a Christian worldview. And I think you're it, surprisingly. I think maybe you seem to go in the direction of philosophical or theological thinking in your exploration for jokes. So I think maybe you are what I have been looking for 10 years, and so I'd like to talk to you about maybe retooling the strip, making some very, very minor changes in how you approach what this even is. And if it goes right here for some months, then we will relaunch the strip, which is exactly what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that was all me. I had become a follower of Christ when I was 18 years old.
Okay, I see. Yeah. But what's interesting to me from what I've heard about Tom is, well, and I did meet him in person once, and he had been on the show via Skype a number of times. But even though he didn't become a pastor, he was sort of a pastor anyway, in a maybe more secular sense, because everybody talks about how good he was at connecting with people and supporting them, and I imagine you experienced that with him too.
I love that people thought that way and saw that, but I also thought that the people who were saying that from outside of what pastors actually do, that those people have probably not really been part of church. Mm-hmm. And we're coming to Tom was a pastor. Yeah, that's a nice thing to say about Tom. And it's not wrong. He was most certainly looking out for cartoonists especially. Mm-hmm. And he meant to help them especially take care of the day-to-day business of acting like a grown-up, paying bills and having insurance and those kinds of things. And we had those kinds of conversations about young cartoonists, and enough that it wasn't a wild topic of conversation. And yes, Tom was very committed to just helping that community as best he possibly could, mm-hmm. For especially young cartoonists who he thought their work deserved to be seen by a wider audience. Tom was probably the first guy in line to say, hey, everybody, take a look at this person's work.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I can see how people would get to that kind of a label for Tom, and I don't think that's in any way wrong to think about mm-hmm. where Tom is concerned. But I don't think it tells the whole or the best story necessarily either.
Okay.
Of who he was for them. So it's not a bad place to go. I think just between you and I think it's sort of an easy, lazy place to go. He was so committed to especially once he moved to Columbus, the cartoonists, he knew everybody anyway, but the cartoonists especially that he had gotten to, Noah Scriver comes to mind, that he had gotten to move to Columbus and begin to participate in this community of people who are involved, probably with the Billy Ireland being some kind of a center for the group in Columbus, the group of cartoonists that were beginning to be not just attracted to come to the CXC show, but to move there. And so anyway, Tom was looking out for this group of people and trying to pass along to them, look, here's how to sort of take care of your own life, which is an irony, really, in some regard. All of us who love Tom, like, I'm not going to have conversations with Tom about how you eat and take care of yourself because I love you. But,
mm-hmm.
The moment, it was always about the work with Tom, really. Mm-hmm. Tom was, from the time Tom was a young person, Tom was up really early in the morning, regardless of what had gone on the previous day or late into the wee hours. Tom was up, Tom was working, Tom was writing. Mm-hmm. And Tom fell in love with writing as a process and as an output from himself. So, as such a young man, he loved writing. He adored the written word. He had I've known so few men or ladies who have the command of English, who have the vocabulary command, who have the euphonious way of delivering, but even on the printed page of Tom Spurgeon. He was amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, you mentioned his health. He had that bad episode in 2011, and I remember seeing the pictures online of how much weight he had lost, and he looked really good once he recovered. It was kind of disappointing that that didn't last.
Well, it was new. It was new behavior. It was new life completely, and he said how difficult that was for him because part of the way people, especially strangers, talk to us or approach us at all, our physicality bears such an important part of that. And for Tom, he said, my goodness, I have very attractive women who are beginning to throw themselves at me, and that's new for me. And it had its moments of, my gosh, this is a brand new thing for me to deal with. But with all of that, I honestly believe that because the work really was the thing for Tom, that the moment Tom was once again back into what would become normal daily life of Tom taking care of his own self and life and workspace and eating habits and exercise habits, that what was new wasn't as easy or familiar as the established behavior of he's up at 5, he's writing by 5:10, and by 7 o'clock in the morning it's barbecued Fritos and Mountain Dew because it's breakfast time, and it's time he's not going to stop working to fix healthy food. He's just going to keep powering through the work that's in front of him with the industrial food chain snacky food that he can get his hands on quickly. And I think he did that more so than eat healthy. I mean, I'm pretty sure that's true. And well, we talked my wife actually had more of those kinds of conversations with Tom than I did. I just loved him to death and didn't, I don't know. It always seemed like a violation of the friendship that we had for me to have had any sort of real course correction conversations with Tom. It just like, no, he's a grown up. My God, he's smarter than I am. It's not as, I mean, the check the listings in Mensa and see how many of them are alcoholics. Smart people don't always do the smartest thing, It's just how it is.
Yeah, yeah. By the way, backtracking a little bit, I sort of formulated him as maybe being sort of a secular pastor, a comics pastor, as myself being the son of a pastor, and so I have some inside observations of how things that a pastor does besides actually holding worship services. And I can see some correlation with Tom's relationship with people.
Sure. Yep, I can too.
Yeah.
And again, the people that I heard say at Tom's memorial, he was always asking, "How are you?" in the middle of even moments that were really serious, and that wasn't an affectation for Tom. Tom, well, as I wrote just after he died in some of my own writings about my relationship with Tom, he modeled friendship maybe better than anybody I've ever known in my whole life. Tom was the one that kept in touch with me much better than I kept in touch with Tom. Now, not as a defense of myself, but Tom also was a single person. I was married and had children, and it doesn't take too much turmoil in a marriage for, now I don't have time to do this or to do that other thing. I'm trying to make all these other things go and keep my work life going at the same time. Tom was just always really, really good at staying in touch, keeping in touch, finding out how you were doing. And it wasn't an affectation for him to ask. He honestly cared. And he always was able to make time to visit through the course of our lives, not just on the phone. Tom had, I don't have no idea the count. Tom was probably visiting in my home, spending the night in my home, through the course of our adult lives, I bet, at least twice a year, oftentimes more. And that was true wherever I lived. That was true when I lived not here. That was true when I lived in Anderson, Indiana. That was true when I lived here in Muncie. Tom came around. And yeah, he honestly was asking after people's lives to see how they were doing, and it mattered. It mattered how they were doing. It mattered how they were satisfied in life, satisfied in their work, that they were connected to work that fulfilled them, and that they were getting some kind of feedback on the work that they were doing so that they might have more fulfillment in what they were doing. And yes, those things are, I think, easily attributed to, well, that's pastoral behavior. Yeah, it is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Before I let you go, now this is the second time you've been on this podcast. The other time was way back, like over 10 years ago, episode 181. And you were doing an environmental strip. What was it? Rustle the Leaf. So what are you doing these days?
I do commercial puppetry and some animations for a sports bar chain headquartered out of Fort Wayne, Indiana, called Wings Etc. We have 80 locations in 10 different states, and they're just really, really wonderful men to work for and with. The man I was doing the cartoon strip Rustle the Leaf with is the guy who brought me in. I'm sure he's the marketing director, but I don't think that title's as many words as are actually in his title. Dave Ponce is that gentleman's name, and he and I continue to work together.
I see.
So I'm doing commercial puppetry now and some animation in addition to, I can't tell you the last time I did anything illustrative for that. Probably last year I did, I don't know, a little menu thing or something like that. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I still draw pretty. I haven't done for 8 months now. I have not made a new video, and I'm not sure I'll make another one. But I have 82 videos or so of an art instructional YouTube channel with a monster puppet host called Paint by Monster. There are 82 of those videos. And here within the last year, I've actually formed a little jazz trio and have been playing jazz guitar out and about. So I'm doing that as well.
Wow. Okay. The puppets, are these puppets that you made, designed yourself? Yeah.
Yep.
Yes. Well, what are they, like hand puppets or string puppets? What kind of puppets are they?
No, they're the actual title of these kinds of puppets are glove puppets. They're a pretty traditional Muppet design, with the exception that, just as Henson, one of the things that Henson did that's important in history is that because the camera was going to be right up on the puppet, for many of the Muppets, he removed the hardboard mouth of the puppet so that subtle changes in the structure of your hand as you are crafting the performance of the puppet, you can have very subtle things go on with the face of the puppet because you have more control over Kermit the Frog, as an example. The way you can get to some subtlety of mouth because there's no hardboard inside of there. So these are just foam and cloth and other soft material puppets, but they're all pretty classic Muppet sorts of designs. They're all about less than 3 feet tall. They're 2.5 feet tall. I have some chicken puppets that I do for the Wings Etc. guys, and the Easel Monster puppet. If you go and watch any of those Paint by Monster videos, there's a miniature set that I've built over the course of a couple of years, and so the puppet performance looks like there's an entire body of a person sitting there doing some art with you and for you. So those are things that I've done here in the last few years.
Okay, sounds interesting. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Check the show notes for links to many of the things we talked about in this episode, including information on each of our guests and all the episodes of Deconstructing Comics that Tom appeared in. Let us know what you think, or share your own memories of Tom Spurgeon. Email us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com. Tweet us at DeconComics. Like our Facebook page or join our active Facebook group. We also invite you to join us on Patreon. Our tiers start at just $2 a month. Pledge at least $4 a month to get our Patreon-only series Spider-Man 1963 and Tim Catches Up with the MCU, where last Saturday we released our review of Avengers Infinity War. Go to patreon.com/deconcomics to join the fun. Can you think of one person you know who would enjoy what we're doing on Deconstructing Comics and Critiquing Comics? Send that person a text message right now and let them know about our show. Thanks. You can also help us get noticed by reviewing us on Apple or any other podcast source. Do your shopping at deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon so that we get a percentage of the sale. And share our episodes on your social media. We appreciate your support in bringing Deconstructing Comics, Critiquing Comics, and To the Bat Poles to a larger audience. Our theme is from bensound.com. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and Mulele and I will critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. Next week, Mulele and I welcome David Dye to our show to talk about our discomfort with one of his stories that we discussed in last month's episode. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.